But for the majority of us who do need to do water changes, this is my recommendation. So when it comes to water parameters or water quality, generally you want to keep your What is up, guys? Welcome to the Tye-Dyed Iguana channel. My name is Collin, and today we're going to be talking about a very popular topic. I'm often in the store working in the sales department, and I'm sure you probably wondered this question too, is what kind of maintenance do I do in my aquarium and how frequently? Well, this is a very broad topic, but in today's video, we're going to break it down a little bit more specifically, and we're going to reveal that one trick that I like to use specifically to know when do I do a water change, when do I not, and what's in between. So find out in today's video. All right, so when we talk about aquarium maintenance, there's going to be a variety of factors, but in general, firstly, your weekly cleaning tasks when it comes to your aquarium. So the first thing would be, in our aquarium, cleaning off the glass. So as far as glass cleaning, although cleaning the glass is not required, obviously most of us like to have a high level of visibility in our aquarium. So for glass cleaning, generally I like to go and hit that once a week. Now, a tip for you guys, there's several ways we can accomplish this. So the first way of mechanically dealing with this issue is using something like an algae scraper. We have these from Seachem. This is the hand scraper. These are super nice. They have both a felt pad for acrylic aquariums and a nice glass razor blade that I like to use on glass tanks. So just remember, you don't want to use a razor blade on an acrylic aquarium because you can scratch it. But most of us, we have glass tanks, so the blade is totally fine. So once a week, I'll go in here and I'll manually scrape all the surface algae from the inside of the aquarium that's on the glass. Another tip I'd like to recommend, if you don't want to get your hands wet, generally most people don't like to stick their hands in the aquarium, and the less you have your hands in the tank, the less oils, residues, soaps you're going to worry about in your aquarium. We also sell these algae cleaning magnets. These are a great option because you can keep it attached to the inside of the glass and just keep it pushed away in a corner. And what you do is you can literally just run your hand on the outside of the tank to clean the glass without ever having to get your hands wet. So this is an excellent option too. And if you don't want to do this weekly, you can just come periodically every couple days and just hit any problem areas. It's going to keep your glass a lot cleaner for longer. So first maintenance task, algae removal from any sort of surfaces. Grab yourself an algae scraper or a magnet. Those are going to be excellent choices. Now, our next topic comes to water changes. Now, I'm sure those of you out there in our viewing audience who are like, I never do a water change, or there's so many plants in my tank that I don't ever have to do water changes, my water's perfect. Well, this part of the video is not for you. So if you know what your water quality is and it's amazing all the time and you never have to do water changes, good for you. But for the majority of us who do need to do water changes, this is my recommendation. So when it comes to water parameters or water quality, generally, you want to keep your nitrates, that's the NO3, that's your final nitrogenous waste product in your aquarium. I like to keep those at 20 parts per million or less. So you're probably saying to yourself, Collin, how often do I do a water change and how much water do I exchange? Well, the water changes is going to depend on a variety of factors, but in general, like I said, I like to keep my nitrates, NO3, under 20 parts per million. So how do I check that? First off, we have a couple different options for test kits. This is probably one of the most valuable test kits you can have in your home arsenal of aquarium testing. So we have the plain nitrate test kit from our friends at API, but I also like the multi-test nitrite and nitrate from our friends over at Seachem. This test I like in particular because you can test them both at the same time. And in my opinion, this one is a little bit more specific as far as getting an exact number. So as far as the colors, the nitrate test kit operates to an orange-red scale from API, but the nitrite and nitrate from Seachem has a pink range, which can be a little bit more precise as far as adjusting exactly where my nitrates are. So for a nitrate test kit, both great options. Another great option for test kits in general. We do have the API Master Freshwater Test Kit. If you have a home aquarium or you have multiple aquariums, this is a good investment as far as having everything. So you're gonna be able to test your pH, ammonia, nitrite, and nitrate. As far as nitrate testing is concerned, generally for most folks, what I'm gonna recommend is, as long as your behaviors, AKA your feeding regimens and things like that, are consistent and you're not having an issue, I generally recommend testing nitrates every 2 weeks. What this is going to do is give you a baseline as far as how much nitrates are accumulating in my home aquarium. So for example, if you test your nitrates and your nitrates come out at 60, we know I probably need to do a water change to my aquarium because although fish can tolerate higher levels of nitrate for stress purposes and everything else as far as bacterial and fungal infections too, we tend to see those kind of things accumulate more historically in dirtier water or having higher nitrates. So we know that ammonia and nitrite, fish have a very low tolerance for both of these. Ideally in a home aquarium, ammonia and nitrite need to be at 0. Nitrates though, we can have within an acceptable range. So let's say I test my water, my nitrates are around 60 parts per million. Well, I know that I need to reduce that by a factor probably of at least half. So what does that mean? So it means if your nitrates are 60 and you have a 10-gallon aquarium, generally I would recommend doing about a 50% water change. So in theory, if your source water, be it RO or tap, is coming in with 0 nitrates, you do a 50% water change, in theory, that should reduce your nitrates to 30 part per million, which is still on the upper end of acceptable, but it is reduced by half. When it comes to water changes, I want to stress to you guys too, generally I like to be cautious and only do up to 50% water change. If you do larger water changes, these 75 and 90% water changes, unless you're really experienced, this can lead to problems. Some of those problems include obviously stress from temperature shock, and you can, in theory, recycle your tank accidentally if you're taking out too much biological material. Now, when it comes to water changes, what do I also do? So depending on the type of substrate that's in your aquarium, if you have gravel or things like this, generally if you're doing those water changes, you may not need to gravel vac every week, or depending on how frequent your water changes are. So let's say my nitrates get up to 30 every 2 weeks. Well, then probably you want to do a small water change about every 2 weeks. You don't necessarily have to do that weekly water change. But if you have gravel, depending on the amount of detritus and the nitrogenous waste build up in the gravel, you may do that maybe twice a month. It does depend though. So for example, if you have 100 part per million nitrate, I'm gonna recommend you get in there and clean out that gravel, because there's gonna be a lot of organic waste material most likely in that substrate. And a lot of this, guys, stems back to how often am I feeding, especially if I'm feeding lots of frozen and fresh foods and we have a lot of waste. That's gonna accumulate in your substrate layer. So keep in mind too, and when it comes to water changes and weekly maintenance, the more controlled you are as far as your feeding of your fish goes, the less labor and elbow grease you're gonna have to put in on the back end correcting that water quality. So when it comes to water changes, you're gonna have to vary it based upon your nitrate levels in the aquarium to keep it in that ideal range. For some people, they can rock a 30 to 40 part per million nitrate, but generally for most folks, I say 20 or less is a good place to be. As far as other maintenance in the aquarium, of course, when you drain out your water, the water you're putting back into the aquarium, you wanna make sure it's about the same temperature. It's within 3 to 4 degrees of the aquarium temperature that your aquarium is currently set to. That's totally cool. However, for example, this time of year, it's very cold outside. The water's coming out of the tap at like 60 degrees. You're not gonna wanna do a 50% water change with 60-degree water, because then theoretically it's gonna drop your water temperature like 6-7 degrees, which number one is stressful for the fish, but number two, often those shocks and things like that can lead to illness in the fish. So remember, when you're doing a water change, you need to make sure your source water coming back into the aquarium is approximately the same temperature. The other thing we want to talk about too when we're replacing water in the aquarium, you need to make sure that water is dechlorinated, removes any chlorines and chloramines or heavy metals. So for things like that, you want to make sure you're using something like Seachem Prime or Aquavitro Alpha to remove any chlorines or chloramines out of the tap water coming into the aquarium. And if you're using RO water, remember, RO water is going to have a very low pH, so you will have to add a supplement such as Seachem's Replenish to add trace minerals back into the water to restore the GH and KH in the water column.